everybody. Welcome to Economics with the Honorable David M. Walker. My name is Nick Talavita. I'll be your moderator for today's conversation. And today we're going to be looking at energy policy and the Department of Energy in the United States. And the question is, should it be eliminated? Now, the vote came in from the Pod TV poll to be about, again, around 50%, a little more said no, it should not be eliminated, and 40% said yes, it should be eliminated. So what is it with eliminating these departments? Okay, it's more or less a justification for why we are spending all this money on these government institutions that are out there, and these agencies, basically giving them discretion. And with that, there's the U.S. budget, which we'll also highlight today later on, which every time I do my empirical analysis, the U.S. budget is not discussed in U.S. high schools, not discussed in middle school, not discussed in colleges, not discussed in law school, yet it represents 25% of every part of our economy. However, for whatever reason, it is available freely on the internet, yet it's ignored by the media, 25% of our GDP, and ignored by our educational institutions. So with that, we're going to bring in our friend from Los Angeles, California, a member of the Mega Society, hopefully an expert today on the U.S. budget, and see what he has to say with the energy policy in the United States of America, Rick Rosner. So Rick, what are your thoughts on this energy?
I'll just tell you the biggest surprise. I knew this before, but I'd forgotten this. But looking over the budget, the DOE is in charge of America's nuclear stockpile.
Yeah.
The U.S. and Russia each have about 1,600 nukes that are supposedly ready to throw at the other country if war breaks out. And keeping those things secure and operational is not something you can do away with. I remember a few years ago, there was that story about how at some missile silos, there was a specialized wrench, and there was only one for the whole country, and they had to keep FedExing the wrench from silo to silo.
Yeah, but it's interesting how the budget will cover things that have nothing to do with the department. And with that, we're going to bring in our SME, otherwise known as subject matter expert in the area, who had to spend a lot of time with the budget that none of the rest of the country other than the U.S. Navy knows anything about. We're going to bring in the Honorable David M. Walker, the former Comptroller General of the United States. As we bathe in a sea of ignorance when it comes to the U.S. budget, we need to see a river of knowledge. David, welcome to your show. I don't know why the budget is not discussed in elementary school, middle school, high school, colleges, MBA schools. I went to all those, law schools, masters in tax programs, and frankly, not on the media at all. And so I'm just going like 25% of our GDP, and we're just not going to talk about it. So we're talking about the Department of Energy. The reason I want to eliminate these departments is because I'm going, you need to, rather than just saying, hey, we have a job, we want to justify our jobs, we're creating huge amounts of debt. And the American public is totally unaware of what these people do. And are they even worth having? So what are your thoughts about the Department of Energy?
Well, first, the Department of Energy has an annual budget of about $32 billion. They have about 14,000 employees. But interestingly, in addition to their 14,000 employees, they have about 95,000 additional contractor employees, which shows you that when you get the data of the federal government as to the size of the federal workforce, it's grossly understated because it doesn't count contractor employees, who in the case of the Department of Energy is a perfect example. You have, 7 and plus times more contractor employees than you have civil servants for the Department of Energy. Thirdly, you look at what the Department of Energy does. Rick was talking about nuclear safety and security with regard to weapons, and that is part of their responsibility. It's obviously something that you don't want to eliminate. At the same point in time, we have way too many nuclear weapons. We don't need but a small fraction of what we have. and we still can achieve our national security objectives, which would end up reducing what they have to do. Interestingly, they're not responsible for safety of nuclear power plants. That's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And you might ask, well, why are we dividing all this stuff up? Safety, is safety. They're responsible for energy security. F on that. They're in theory, you should be trading off energy security with environmental sustainability. But no, the government's got a different department that deals with environmental issues. And so you're not really in a good position to do that trade-off. Presumably, they're responsible for the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. Well, that's, we've been draining that for political purposes rather than for national security purposes. And what about the electric grid? The electric grid is incredibly vulnerable, especially to an EMP, an electronic magnetic pulse device. What's being done about that? So, I come back to what we've talked about on a lot of these departments and agencies. The federal government doesn't have a plan. It doesn't link resources to results. It doesn't have outcome-based metrics. It's had a proliferation of departments, agencies, to do various things who, don't do a very good job in linking resources to results and getting the kind of outcomes that we want. But secondly, they proliferated so much that everybody's doing their own thing that we can't really benefit from the economies of scale. We're not in a position to be able to do the right kind of trade-offs with regard to security versus sustainability, with regard to effectiveness. And so this is just another example of the need for, a comprehensive government transformation that it's going to have to take place. And as we've talked about before, we're going to have to make tough decisions on social insurance programs, discretionary spending, and revenues. And that's what the Fiscal Stability Commission or Debt Commission, call it whatever you want, it's all about, that I've been advocating before. But after you do that, we're going to need something like a Grace Commission on steroids that can end up looking at how the government is trying to execute what its roles and responsibilities are, because we need a major reorganization and a major rationalization of the size and scope of government, as well as linking resources to results based on outcomes. Those are my preliminary thoughts.
Okay, and we're going to bring in a person who actually has more education than me, a former associate dean of the University of South Dakota School of Law, and also has a doctorate degree as well as a law degree in LLM. Dr. Dan Worthington. As you notice, we're discussing the U.S. budget. I'm curious, though, in any of the courses that you went to, and you went through a lot more school than I did you ever take a course on the U.S. budget? Or even, did they even mention it in any classroom?
Well, certainly it was mentioned, but there was no specific courses on the U.S. budget. Now, I finished school about 30 years ago, so it's become increasingly more important because of the huge deficits and unfunded liabilities of the United States. But I agree with everything that David said about the current situation. And there's just so much bloat in government. And a lot of that's because of the corruption and the inside types of deals that the government does. Government needs to be cleaned up everywhere, from all the administrative functions of government all the way through Congress and the executive, because there's just way too much waste. They used to call it fraud, waste, and abuse in my day. Now it's just everyday spending. I guess.
Yeah, they still call it fraud, waste, and abuse, and people have they think there's a panacea that if we eliminate all fraud, waste, and abuse, we can balance the budget, which is ridiculous. It'll never be zero, but we should have zero tolerance for it. Problem is, government's grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, and again, we're going to have to get the policies right. But then after we get the policies right, we're going to have to do a fundamental government restructuring and realignment because we're way out of shape. I know Rick's got his hand up.
Yeah, Rick.
So you talk about all the huge changes that need to be made, and huge changes will be made whether we make them or not. The choice is between us getting ahead of what technology and other factors are going to do to us, so we have some measure of control, or just letting government continue to be dysfunctional and just having all these changes come at us, crisis after crisis, and turning more and more power over to tech entities augmented with AI. Your book talks about, will America be a superpower in 2040? 2040 is only 16 years away now. And all these issues and solutions, they have a big dose of science fiction in them. It's unavoidable.
Exactly.
Well, the issue is we will ultimately have to make major changes. The question is, are we going to do it preemptively, prudently, in order to avoid a crisis? Or are we going to wait until a crisis occurs and then we have to do it reactively? You know, understand the government is a monopoly. It doesn't face competition. It is risk averse. It is a lag indicator. And that is by itself, a prescription for inefficiency, ineffectiveness, lack of economy, lack of innovation, if you will. One thing you mentioned, Rick, is we know we've got a lot going on in AI right now. There's a lot of things that the government is doing that could be automated. I mean, there's absolutely no question about that. That's going to face a lot of pushback from the public sector unions, but it's inevitable that it's going to happen. It's a matter of when and how.
And the government is broken right now. This Congress is the least effective Congress in history. They've enacted 22 pieces of legislation. A functioning Congress enacts 100 to 300 pieces of legislation every year. And it's just not happening.
Well, part of the problem is when you look at the data, Rick, we have to be careful because we do have a divided Congress right now. And, sometimes things get passed out of one branch and the other branch won't even take it up. And so it's important that when we're looking at the stats, that we look at them individually and collectively. In other words, one house can be much more effective than the other. But in the aggregate, we don't get anything done unless they end up passing both houses to get a presidential signature or override a presidential veto.
But we're so polarized that they can't agree on just about anything.
Well, they can't agree within their individual houses. I mean, you've got a problem within the House of Representatives. You've got a problem within the Senate. Of course, in the Senate, you've got 60 people have to support something in order to get a cloture vote and go to a vote. Unless it's on budget reconciliation and, in which it's a simple majority. And by the way, a lot of the things that we talk about, especially when you're talking about fiscal matters, tax and spending, all those things can go on budget reconciliation. So they can't be filibustered. If they have, if they have the vision, the leadership and commitment, they can put a lot of the things that we talk about on budget reconciliation and avoid a filibuster.
Right.
Hey, Dave, really quickly and everything, your military background and all the stuff that you've done in that space. I had read an interesting article which talked about Homeland Security and some of the things that could be impacted by the government shutdown. And one of those programs apparently is responsible for detecting nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons. But the other one actually deals with drones. And I know y'all were talking about AI and everything. And there are a lot of drones that are flying illegally in the United States. And apparently one of those departments that might not be as effective or have the money to deal with that should these budget cuts not take place and should that happen. So as one that's in the military complex and has been in the military complex for a number of years, I was just wondering your thoughts on that, because I can tell you there are a lot of people that fly drones, whether it's flying them in events, whether it's flying them in a number of places. But yeah, drone flights are very popular these days, and it seems like everybody and their mother's got a drone, but apparently we won't be able to tighten the security around those drones should this department be cut out.
Well, first, for the record, I haven't served in uniform. I have served over 20 years in the public sector, including as Comptroller General of the United States, including as professor at the Naval Academy and on the Defense Business Board, which I'm still on. But I haven't served in uniform, so I don't want people to think that I have. Although I'd hope to do it for my career, because that appointments to both the Naval and Military and Air Force academies couldn't go because of my left ear. Secondly, Mark, these people who cry they don't have enough money, I don't have a lot of sympathy for that because we're spending too much money right now. Now, obviously, there are differences. Some departments do a better job than others. Some are more deserving than others. I mean, one of the arguments that I made when I was at GAO is that when I left, we generated over $100 return for every dollar invested in the agency by calculating how much resources were saved or freed up for other higher priorities by the adoption of our recommendations. And those got reviewed by our Inspector General. They were confirmed by the departments and agencies that we dealt with. And so we generated a positive return on investment. That's a novel concept, especially for government, right? But a vast majority of these agencies don't. And they assume that everything that they have, they need. And therefore, when something's not going well, they want more money. They want more people, rather than trying to do one of the things that we've been talking about on this show, and that is look at the base. The base is bloated. The base is ineffective, and therefore you need to fundamentally realign and re-engineer the base of government, and that's going to take a special effort, but it's going to have to be done. Secondly, we avoided a shutdown when we did a continuing resolution. There are two dates. One is in January, one is in early February, where we may have to look at the issue again. My personal view is they're not going to shut down the government. It's very disruptive. It further undercuts public confidence in the Congress and in government. It costs us money because the people that get laid off temporarily get paid retroactively. And by the way, you know who the only people who get paid in a government shutdown? The only people who continue to get paid is the Congress, and they're the problem. I mean, you're talking about outrageous incentives and accountability mechanisms. I mean, cut me a break. So one of the things that we have to do is we need no budget, no pay. You don't pass the budget and all the appropriations bills on time. Congress doesn't get paid until it does, and there's no retroactive pay. Now, with the 27th Amendment, we'll have to do that prospectively for the next Congress, but so what? That's fine. That's progress, right? As far as the drones, you're right. There's a proliferation of drones. That's an issue. Most of the drones, obviously, there's a proliferation or civil, you have individuals that have drones that they're flying all around, and not too long, we're going to have flying cars, evidently. Oh, it's only going to cost you about $300K for a flying car is the current estimate.
So Dave, I'm going to start off with a compliment, if I may, before I lay into you. Right?
Well, compliment and council routine. I got it.
No, yes, exactly. So I'll start with a compliment. I'm opening a new office next year, and if it's $100 return for every dollar I spend, could you please come work for me? Because I need that sort of return. But no, you're so critical of the government here, and you said they have no plan, Dave. And I think that's unfair. I think I should inform you and the viewers of some of the plan, right? So the president has proposed $179 million for the Department of Energy's Office of Manufacturing and Energy Supply Chains, and $173 million for nuclear isotope research and development. Okay, $24 billion for national security in relation to that nuclear. That's fair enough. And $245 million to address the evolving physical and cyber threats. But see, you white guys missed the really important stuff, right? Because he has also requested $3.8 billion for the president's strong support for historically black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions. So what do you think? Do you think the $3.8 billion should be spent on race issues when it comes to energy, or do you think it should be spent on defense? I think you've got it wrong, Dave. You're so critical of the government. You've missed it.
Let me be clear, Shaquille. The government every year has a quote-unquote budget, okay? But the budget is all about money and people. It's not about outcomes. All right. And this is how much I want. This is what I want to use it for, but not what kind of results are we trying to achieve? How do we measure success? And by the way, the budget for the federal government's not really a budget, because when you look at what is controlled, the $1.5 trillion in tax expenditures aren't controlled. And of the direct spending, over 70% of the direct spending, we've written a blank check. It's called mandatory spending. So every year, they're actually only looking at less than 30% of direct spending. And when you combine direct spending with indirect spending, which is tax expenditures, the government controls less than 10% of annual expenditures. And that's called a budget. But my bigger point is they're not linking it to what are we trying to achieve and how do we measure success? What's working? What's not working? What should we kill? What should we cut? What should we increase? What should we start? You know, that's the kind of approach that we need to take, especially given how far out of whack. But I appreciate your points.
My point there, really, while I was being facetious, but my point
I
there
know
really
you are. I know
that the politicians would seek to distract us on cultural issues rather than addressing the really important issues that actually matter. And a lot of the time, it's because if you try to sit down with the everyday person and discuss some of the issues that we've brought up here, they're not going to understand it. They can understand other things. Just like we've been saying now, I think, Dave, you and I have been on the shows now for a couple of years, and we've been talking about what happens when the interest rate goes up from 0% to 5%. Now it's at 5%. You've got $33 trillion in debt. That's $1.65 trillion in interest payments. So that's directly affecting the amount of money that the government can spend on things that are actually important to Americans. And this is the disgrace of it. If you were married to somebody who overspent their budget the way the US government did, you'd want a divorce, right? If there was a monopoly that acted the way the US government does, you would rebel against the monopoly. But yet we're stuck with this, and it's terrible. It's not just the United States; it's most other Western countries, including the 2 countries that I'm a citizen of, and the 4 countries that I live in. It's a disgrace, and I think we all need to start standing up and saying, you know what, enough is enough. We're the people, you represent us. And so to Rick Rosner's comment or criticism, they haven't passed enough legislation, only 22 pieces. Rick, enjoy it for the moment, buddy, because the fact that they've only been able to pass 22 new pieces of law is probably a good thing for the moment.
Probably.
Shaquille, just to be clear and everything, I want to point out something that I just feel I have to point out and everything, which is that while a lot of the HBCUs started off as A&M kind of schools, meaning agricultural and manufacturing, I think that even Dave will agree that a lot of those schools have actually moved into the technology field, and a lot of them are doing some great work in the field of technology and in the field of those fields that they are saying that we want to do research in. Howard has done some, Florida A&M has done a number of others as well. So the money going to those schools, I don't think is necessarily wrong if those schools are advancing a lot of that development.
I don't want to open up this can of worms. My point that I'm trying to make here is that if you want to do things for HSBUs and you want to deal with cultural issues and race relations, you can do that. Don't put it in the energy budget. Right. Okay. The energy department is there for a specific reason, not to put money into some other cultural issue that has nothing to do with energy.
It's not a cultural, but I'm not going to go down that. I hear what you're saying about going down that avenue, but what I'm saying is that if it is doing work in the energy field,
Mark, please let me finish this. That's what we have seen with the Department of Education. That's what we've seen with the Department of Labor. That's what we've seen with all the departments that have been criticized on this show in the previous handful of weeks. Okay, it is the mismanagement of funds and the misallocation of funds into things for political reasons rather than those funds being spent on things that are actually important that those departments are supposed to be about. So as I'm not going to concede the point, but even if I did, that HSBUs have an important role to play, that has nothing actually to do with the energy department.
I know,
Should
but I'm
they-
saying, but if they're doing research in the energy field, because actually some of those HBCUs have done some major research in the energy space, then they are playing a role in that department.
Absolutely not.
That is my argument as well.
You're playing fast and loose. You're playing fast and loose with the rules there. Okay, every university
Not fast and loose.
in the United States does research into the energy department. The fact that these particular organizations have been singled out for extra funding is where the problem is. It shouldn't be about that. It should be about results-oriented funding, not funding because of some sort of political goal.
So do you have issue with the Department of Energy giving money to any college or just HBCUs?
Jatovi, I'm not even going to play your games. Neither.
It's not a game. You brought up the
Neither of the
HBCUs.
two questions. Neither of the two questions that you asked.
And said that
Neither of
shouldn't
the two
be.
questions you
It's a
asked were
simple
implied
question.
by my.
Well,
So obviously, you just
let-
have
I'm
issues
asking
with-
you.
guys,
Neither
we
of
need
the
to
two
get
questions
back
that you
onto
asked were
economics.
implied by my
We need-
answer.
We need to get back to economics. Yeah, let's
Yeah,
get first. First,
Economics.
First, let me say that the Energy Department does fund energy research. Okay, that money ought to go to deserving initiatives and deserving institutions, irrespective of what their affiliation might be. Okay,
Yeah, that's right.
and so I think that's the bottom line. And
Rick, you had a comment.
So here's an energy-related expense that's not going to be leaving the U.S. budget soon. Oil companies getting $20 billion a year in subsidies. And even if you did cut the subsidies, and I don't see how you could because nobody has the will to do it, the oil companies would pass on those costs to the consumer.
that's right.
That's thing one. Thing two is maybe the DOE should spend a few $1,000,000 on a PR campaign to get people less afraid of nuclear reactors. France gets something like 80% of its electricity from nuclear reactors. And when you look at the history of them, they generally fail because people did a whole series of stupid stuff. Chernobyl failed not because of the machinery, but because people were really stupid with it. And modern nuclear reactors could be safe and could do a lot for renewable energy.
Yeah, let me come back on that. My understanding is about 80% of France's energy is nuclear. And I believe, my personal belief is that we need an all-in energy strategy that gradually transitions to more fossil-free, alternative sources, and that nuclear needs to be a big part of that. And I do think that there would need to be a major public education and engagement effort on that, because there's a lot of fear that's left over because of Chernobyl, because of 3 Mile Island, et cetera. But the advances that have taken place in the nuclear field are tremendous, and it's actually one of the cleanest and one of the safest, all things considered.
And
That's
Bill,
got a
Gates-
quick question on what's happened with the oil and energy situation in the United States. We here in Australia, we do produce some oil, not very much compared to the globe. We here in Australia are currently paying for premium fuel. We're paying about $2 a litre, which in round figures is about $7 a gallon for you guys in the US. Now, why are we paying so much? We didn't used to pay that much. So why are we paying so much for it? Well, one of the reasons why is because the US decided that it's not going to, give any more drilling rights on federal lands and offshore, et cetera, et cetera. That means that there is a higher international demand on international oil, which drives prices up all over the board, which means that everybody in the world is paying more for it. But if there is some justification for that, I'm yet to hear it, because apparently the justification is that that's going to do something for the environment. Well, has oil usage decreased in the United States as a result of these policies? Of course not. All that's happening is the US is importing oil. So there's, of course, the environmental cost of shipping that oil over, as well as the fact that the oil is, as you just said, Dave, it's dirtier. It's not as clean as American oil. Now, Americans like to say they've got the cleanest oil on earth. I won't say it's the cleanest, but it certainly would be one of the cleanest forms of oil on earth. So why aren't they using it? and then you go and sell your strategic reserve, some of which went to China. It's not just the United States that's affected, it's the rest of the Western world and your allies and the rest of the world in general that are affected by bad policy from the leadership of the free world.
The U.S. is producing more oil now than it ever has before. 2022 was a record. 2023 is a new record. And 2024 is expected to set yet another record. Biden kind of went back on his, campaign promises and is letting America produce a ton of energy, fossil fuel energy.
Well, we got to be careful here, okay? Because it's easy to manipulate these statistics.
Okay.
The current administration is clearly anti-fossil fuels, okay? It's one thing to produce more from the wells that you already have. It's another thing to not allow additional wells and additional exploration. That's where the policy has really changed, okay? The bottom line is that we were energy independent in 2021. We are no longer energy independent. Yes, we may be producing more oil, but demand for oil around the world has increased, including in the United States. And it is a global market. There's no question about it. But what we do or what we fail to do has an impact on global prices, which is what Shaquille is saying. The other thing is that right now, there are many people who believe, including me, that we need to send a more effective signal to Iran, given their support of terrorism in the Middle East and around the world. And that might include doing something with regard to their oil infrastructure. But the reason that nothing has been done on that, in my view, is not only because of weakness from the administration, because they're concerned about what that would do to global oil prices. And believe it or not, 2024 is an election. And believe it or not, politicians tend to think about, well, what are the impacts of certain things going to be on my popularity and my electability in November of 2024? So just a few thoughts.
With respect,
I think Rick's hand
respect,
up the longest, I think. Yeah.
I think Jatovi's up.
And Jacoby's up. Well, whatever. You do it, Nick.
Right.
You moderate.
Hey, Jatovi.
Oh, I thought it was Rick and then Shaq and then
No,
me.
I went. I'll go around again.
Okay, I was just going to ask because, I don't know, because Dave, you had just brought up in terms of what we would do in sending a message to Iran and their oil reserves. I don't know what that exactly would mean and how we would go about doing that. And then also in terms of the global demand skyrocketing, and that's going to be a constant for a while until we get off of the oil itself. I do agree with your approach about we need to get off of fossil fuels. And I don't know if that's, the same thing as what they're trying to do now in terms of moving towards less fossil fuels. But I agree with that approach is that's what we need to do. We have to get off of fossil fuels because the oil market, we can't continue to hook our wagon to oil. But again, I my curiosity was when you had stated that I got thrown and when you had stated sending a message. What do you mean we would send
I'd be happy to answer that. Two things. It's going to take a lot longer to get off of fossil fuels than this administration is proposing. It's going to take a lot longer to go to EV vehicles than this administration is proposing. You've got to be a lot more realistic than they're being. Okay. So it's, yes, climate change is real. Yes, man has something to do with climate change. Yes, fossil fuels, are not as clean as other alternatives, and we need to be moving. But we have to have an all-in strategy and a more realistic transition. With regard to Iran, there are things that you can do either through cyber, if you want to avoid kinetic, or through kinetic actions to get their attention. The fact is that the only thing that Iran respects, and most authoritarian regimes expect force. And the only thing that's going to get their attention is you hit them in the pocketbook, and that's economics. All right. If we end up continuing to hit munition supply warehouses for their proxies in the middle of nowhere, that's not going to get their attention because it doesn't hit them where it hurts. When we took out the head of their Revolutionary Guard, that got their attention. Okay, and so we have to recognize reality. Iran is the player who is funding and supporting all this instability in the Middle East.
So I'd like to say a couple of things. One, with respect, Rick, yes, you're correct that the US is currently producing more oil than it has previously. But to me, that statement doesn't really matter too much because it's the same as saying when one person says we don't have enough young people being born, we have a very distressed marriage rate and a very low birth rate. And if the counter to that is yes, but we actually have more children today alive than we ever have had before, that's not really a counter to it. Yes, we do, but the issue still exists. I just want to come to
Ikea, one thing real quick on this. Putin's made a strong pitch just within the last 2 weeks that he wants women to have more kids because they have to feed them. He wants to. His target is 8. Oh God! I mean,
no.
And what do you think about that?
But of course, he would. Look, I've just been in Africa, as you know, several times this year. And they have big families and they're very family-oriented people, and they generally are quite conservative in their viewpoints. We are falling behind, but that's a different debate. I just want to come back to you though, Dave, and I'm not actually being facetious now, having a crack at you. I just want to bring up something that you and I discussed on a previous show that I've discussed on many other shows, which is the idea of nation building and the idea of us intervening in other countries. Now, we've already got sanctions on Iran. A friend of mine showed me some pictures of Iran back in the 60s and 70s. It looks gorgeous. Looks like the kind of place you'd want to go for a holiday. It looks absolutely brilliant. Okay, the girls in the 70s and things like that. But what you're talking about now is taking more action against Iran, but yet you're not too keen on the US government and its allies spending money on military action and that sort of thing. Sanctions clearly haven't worked, and that's why I will come back to. I believe that there has to be a line in the sand. And there has to be a point where we are prepared to spend our money and risk our lives to fight for what we believe in. And I will stand by what I have said on many, many shows the last few years. Unfortunately, freedom and peace is not bought with diplomacy. Freedom and peace is bought with blood and violence. It's a horrible reality, but it is a reality nonetheless. And I think that we in the West have to be prepared to use those methods in order to make the world a better place.
Jatovi.
I have to completely disagree with blood and violence leads to peace. Blood and violence lets everybody know that doesn't work. It only leads to more people wanting to create vengeful acts against the individual that just attacked them. So it's the old saying, hatred begets more hatred, war begets more war, death begets more death. It all leads up. So diplomacy is huge, and diplomacy should always be at the forefront. And Dave, when you talked, and that's why I wanted to ask you about what you meant with in response to Iran, because I do agree that there needs to be a response there, but I don't think blood and violence does anything based on our history alone. For example, when we went after Al-Qaeda, next person that popped up was ISIS. ISIS had the same actual ideology as Al-Qaeda. And then you had all these other you can look at local gangs, for example. When the Bloods and the Crips went back and forth, the more people that the Bloods killed, it created more Crips. The more Crips that the more.
Jatovi, it seemed to work pretty well in the Civil War between the Southern secessionists and the Northern Unionists. Right?
Yeah. Let me finish, and then I think whoever's next had their hand up. But again,
it's Rick and then Dave.
Yeah,
well, Dave show, so let's go Dave.
War just creates more wars.
Can I clarify? Okay.
Yes.
Rick goes next and then Mark. Okay. Let me clarify. I'm a big fan of Teddy Roosevelt. I think he was one of our greatest presidents for lots of different reasons. And one of the things that Teddy Roosevelt said is walk softly, which means diplomacy, but carry a big stick. I totally agree that you want military action to be a last resort. All right. But there's a limit as to how much diplomacy is realistic and will work. When people are attacking your forces intentionally to try to do harm, and when they are doing harm, and they do it over and over and over again, at some point in time, you have to draw a line and say, if you cross this line, you will suffer a consequence. And if economic sanctions aren't working, that consequence has to be real and something that will get their attention and cause them to change their behavior. There are things we can do, cyber, that avoids kinetic action. But at some point in time, you may have to be prepared to do kinetic action on a targeted basis in order for them to get the message and in order to provide stability. Because these terrorist groups, and you've named several, all right, Hezbollah, Hamas, Al-Qaeda, the Muslim Brotherhood, these terrorist groups wouldn't exist to the extent that they do if they weren't funded by Iran. But let me stop now.
Can you get Iran's government to change? Every year or two, since we see massive riots. Lately, we've had the riots in Iran, over head coverings and them killing girls who don't cover their hair, and it hasn't changed anything. That's thing one. Thing two is with regard to our overall energy strategy. Our behavior isn't going to change. We're going to keep burning tons of oil. Climate change is going to happen, and the solutions are going to be science fictional in the 2040s and 2050s, where it's going to be because AI and everything else has transformed the world, and lifespans have increased to the point where people wait until they're 50 years old to have kids or don't have kids at all because they're living to 120, and the whole world will change and get weird. But all this semi-weird and horrible stuff will happen before that.
Well,
it's already weird.
Let's be clear. Money is fungible, okay? The fact that we freed up $6 billion, and even though we tell them you can only use it for these humanitarian purposes, if they have $6 billion more available, yeah, okay, I'll use that $6 billion for humanitarian purposes, and that gives me the flexibility to be able to use $6 billion for.
Wasn't that almost immediately refrozen? They haven't got.
There's conflicting information on that, but let's get to the point we're talking about now. The second point is, if you have less money, you're not going to be able to do as much. All right. And so if they don't make as much money on energy for a variety of reasons, they're not going to be able to do as much. In fact, when there are under sanctions now, but they're being evaded. I mean, China is buying a lot of their oil. There's a lot of things that are going on. And in fact, there's evidence that back when the sanctions were being more effective, they weren't able to fund Hamas and Hezbollah and others as much. They were telling them, we can't give you as much money because of that. So who's next? Mark, I think, and then Shaquille.
Yeah, I'm next, and then Shaquille. Dave, one of the questions I was curious about, and we actually mentioned it on the World Edition earlier today, is how much of the energy conversation is also that in our backyard? Because apparently Venezuela, which is a dictatorship, a lot of people consider it to be that and everything, is looking at the possibility of going into Guyana, which is definitely an oil-rich nation and everything. So I just wondering, how much should we be concerned about that, and how much should we be using that as part of our policy as well? Because there is oil even in our own backyard, whether that's Guyana or whether that's Alaska.
Well, first, Venezuela is a good example.
Yes.
Venezuela has the most proven oil reserves of any country on earth, even more than Saudi Arabia. They are totally incompetent, and corruption is rampant. Okay, so Venezuela is the poster child of government ineptness, and a lot of the people that are crossing the southern border are doing it because they're leaving that country. Okay, the problem is there's a lot of people that are coming from countries like Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, that are authoritarian, socialist / communist countries. Okay, and they don't like some of the trends that they're seeing in the United States. Because some of the things that are going on in this country, government getting bigger, taking more control, reducing your privacy, it's and your freedom. But the bottom line is, look, we've got plenty of energy sources, either ourselves and or among our allies. But the last thing that we have to keep in mind is whether you're trying to provide energy security or whether you're trying to provide environmental sustainability, you just can't look at country by country. You got to look at the globe. We're never going to end up achieving our environmental objectives if China and India and Africa don't play. We're never going to get there, okay? And we're not going to be able to get where we want to get with regard to, energy policy unless we look at it on a global basis. Because
Dave, just as a quick follow-up, should we defend Guyana, which is definitely an ally of ours, if Venezuela is saying, because they just voted on Sunday, that they are wanting to invade part of that territory, not the entirety of Guyana, but definitely the oil-rich part of Guyana? And like you said, Venezuela already got.
I guess, my point is that's in our hemisphere. One would think that we would have more of an interest in what's going on in our hemisphere. But I guess one of the questions that I would ask, because this is new to me, why the hell they got to invade Guyana? They've got the largest oil reserves in the world.
And why does America have to import oil?
Yeah, right. I mean, we shouldn't have to import oil. Okay, we shouldn't have to invade Guyana.
So the three countries that you named earlier, like Argentina and the three countries you named earlier, they should be the wealthiest countries or amongst the wealthiest countries, certainly per capita, in existence. But yet, bad management. I find that absolutely astonishing. I do want to address something, though, that both you said, Dave, and that Rick said, well, loosely said, in relation to us achieving our international environmental goals and climate change goals. Thank goodness China and India and Africa aren't following it. Because if you actually have a look at the things that have been proposed, that would be the surest and quickest way to kill every resource that we have left on this planet. And I don't say that lightly. As you guys know, I'm involved in this field. I own a solar panel company. I'm the president of the International Green Alliance. The issue that we have is that renewable energy is being touted, but yet we see absolutely no investment. The Canadians have just been complaining about this. No regulations and no investment at all into things like geothermal and hydro where it could work. The Hoover Dam produces enough power for, I can't remember how many it is, 800,000 homes or whatever it is. Okay. No investment, no research whatsoever. The research and all the money is going to solar farms, wind power, etc. Now, those technologies can work and can work very well in certain locations. In other locations, those things are not particularly efficient. Solar panels, for example, I own a solar power company. Solar panels, when they test them, they say this is the efficiency and this is its potential lifespan. But that efficiency is tested in perfect conditions in a lab. So if you take those solar panels and put them in less ideal conditions, they're not going to perform as well. And oftentimes what we see is that the environmental cost, forget about the economic cost, the environmental cost of producing those panels is not repaid over that panel's expected life. This is something that we see all the time. And it's because of, again, politics and bad government. Rather than us saying solar panels are going to work really great in this location, wind farms are going to work really great in this other location, geothermal is going to be better somewhere else, nuclear is going to be better somewhere else, and hydro is going to be better somewhere else. And we're not doing that. And it's because a lot of that has to do with lobbying. And just last point, because I don't think Jatovi heard me, if it really is true, Jatovi, that violence begets violence. Why aren't the southern states of the United States still rebelling against the Unionists in the North? Why isn't the United Kingdom still rebelling against America after its War of Independence? If violence begets violence. The issue is, if you really stand for and care about an issue and you are prepared to use enough force to achieve what you want to achieve, other parties will back down eventually.
Rick.
So 120 years ago, the major environmental problem in America's big cities was horse poop. There were hundreds of thousands of horses walking around.
San Francisco and a different kind of poop now, but go ahead.
So poop, horse pee, and dead horses just filled the streets. That was 6 inches deep. And they tried all these different solutions, couldn't get ahead of it. And the only thing that made it not a problem was the technology changed and the horses went away, replaced by cars. We're not going to change our behavior. We're going to keep burning fuel, whatever fuel is easiest and cheapest. And it's going to be technology that will change our lifestyles, that we will, as virtual reality in the 2040s, 2050s gets better, we'll spend more time at home. The population will drop because we'll be so involved in our entertainment that we won't, form families. But sadly, the solutions to these problems are not going to be behavioral. They're going to be science fictional when new technology kicks out the old dirty technology.
Jacoby.
And often, one more thing. Often the new technology looks cleaner, as Dave was saying, but it isn't. Like California got rid of grocery bags, replaced them with cloth bags at the Turns out if you do an analysis, those cloth bags create more pollution and waste than the plastic bags did.
Yeah, in California also got rid of common sense, so
Yeah, it's Toby's term to answer and everything. I also want him to introduce our new family member, the lovely dog.
I was referring to the poop map in San Francisco that was unveiled last week. Go ahead, Jacoby.
Just really quickly, I think Rick is honestly on the where the solution is, because it has to deal with technology, and where, Dave, you started out with the investment in education, because we can create these giant leaps and bounds in technology based on education. And that's where I think we can start to corner in. And I disagree that we have to do the whataboutism. Well, what if China's not focused on global warming? We shouldn't, I think. And I don't want to put words in your mouth. I don't think that's what you're saying, but I think we have to focus on it. And that's where we can be that leader on that area. To retort what just Shaq said, Shaq, there are still signs outside in North Carolina that talk about the South will rise again. So again, all these wars, all this hatred still begets hatred. It doesn't disappear, especially when you're going after an ideology. So even hold on. Can I finish? Shaq, let me finish. So just to say that, oh, well, this war happened, so that group has now disappeared. It's not. That group is still around. We still have problems. And again, nothing you have said in terms of, oh, well, this war happened, so therefore it's not happening. No, things are still happening bad. And that's because there are a lot of problems. If I were to go and attack my neighbor because they kicked my dog, you know what's going to happen? That neighbor's still going to do something against me again. Hate begets hate. We have to break that cycle. But to get back,
I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful for the military that came before me.
Let me get. Well, first, I believe strongly in leading by example and practicing what you preach. Okay, whether it's a country, whether it's an entity, or whether it's an individual, I believe strongly in that. But I think you have to be realistic in what you're trying to do and how you do it. One of the funniest cartoons that I've seen lately is this guy's out in front of this old shack out in the middle of nowhere, charging his EV vehicle. and he hears all this racket coming from behind this building. And so he goes behind the building and he sees there's a diesel generator that's generating the electricity that he's using to charge his car. Okay. Without understanding that, electricity's got to come from someplace. It's got to be generated from someplace. And you've got to have an adequate capability to produce and distribute, if you will, which we don't. All right. Secondly, in order to ultimately achieve our objectives, while we have to lead by example, we need to be realistic with regard to what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it, and with regard to what time frame. But for us to succeed on a global basis, others have to come with us. Now, maybe they're not going to be leaders, they're going to be laggards, but they have to come with us. I want to mention one other thing, and then Nick, I respectfully request that next week what we do is we show my 7.5-minute talk that I sent to you. And that we end up having a conversation based on that. Last week, I gave a 7.5-minute speech before hundreds of state legislators from around the country on our deteriorating financial condition and what do we need to do to address it. And I think that would be a good thing for us to talk about. U.S. is not the only country that's got this problem, right? I mean, other countries have this problem too. But I think it'd be a good way for us to have a very stimulating conversation. Rick is, I think, next.
All right. So the U.S. is leading by example, and a lot of it is market forces. Some of it is government action. The U.S. is down to only 50,000 coal miners in the whole country. So we're stepping away from coal. And I think market forces will be helpful. The island of Venice, or it's a bunch of islands, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. When you go there, they have a bunch of portable sidewalks stacked up in the center of every street. When a flood hits and they get hit with a gazillion people run out, they set up these raised sidewalks that look like, folding tables. And all of a sudden, the whole island is underwater and people are walking around on portable sidewalks 2.5 feet above the ground. And you can buy a condo in the world's most beautiful city for less than you can buy a condo in Sherman Oaks because of the flooding. And somebody's going to figure out they could make $1 billion by rehabilitating Venice, and they'll figure out a way to make robots that get under the island and slowly raise it up to fight climate change. So, and like the Netherlands has this big wall that swings in to when they start getting flooded, a wall, that's like 3 city blocks long, and people are going to make trillions of bucks off of solving these problems. So we're going to suffer, but we'll overcome them, and some people are going to get richer off of it.
Yeah. And in the short term, though, I would like to also maybe somewhere address the U.S. response to Venezuela-Guyana, because the last time one country said we're going to invade another country, it created a lot of problems when the U.S. didn't do anything. And that's when I believe Russia invaded Crimea and the U.S. didn't do anything. And are we going to really sit in our backyard and allow Venezuela, who's causing tremendous problems here in the United States, to do that? So far, the administration has been quiet, and the media has been quiet on this whole issue.
Yeah,
but at least Venezuela doesn't have nukes like Russia does, so we can go ahead and frickin' attack Venezuela.
Yeah, but what are you going to do? You can't sit there and criticize the government for getting involved, and then criticize the government for not getting involved. You can't have it both ways. The electorate of the United States,
they need to get involved. Okay.
Yeah, I agree.
Mark said Sunday, Venezuelan government has passed
to come back to climate change.
It's okay for them to invade Guyana. Okay, the United States and the media has been silent on the issue. And if they invade Guyana, what are we going to do? Are we going to?
I don't think we're going to stand by.
To come back to climate change
to invade Guyana.
If we're not prepared to set a proper, good example about ways that we can actually improve the environment, which is really where the focus should be. The climate's going to change regardless of what we do. It just may not change to the same degree. But unless we can set a good example, why would the poorest countries on earth look at us in the West and go, oh, they've got power outs, they've got brownouts and blackouts all the time because they're using renewable energy. Let's sign ourselves up for that. Those countries that are developing, that are emerging economies, they're not going to sign up for this. We have done a terrible job for our own people. We're setting a terrible example for others. And that's exactly the reason why Iran and all these other countries are going to continue to trade with each other and just tell the West where to go.
And
We're laughing their butts off, right?
Because we're at the hour. So thank everybody for Economics Monday. We will see you next week. Till then, have a good week. Bye-bye.